everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am super excited to share with all of you my initial impressions, swatches, demo, and review of the new Natasha Denona Hyper Natural Face Palette. So this is her latest release. It's a very unique release from her that includes eyeshadows, bronzer, and blush. So I'm really looking forward to trying out all these products on my face today. I also in my order picked up the Natasha Denona lip pencil in the shade Emilia. This is from her I Need a Rouge collection. I've been really enjoying red lips recently, so I thought this would be a nice addition to my collection since this is my all-time favorite lip formula. So I'll be playing around with these products today. So to start off, here are the product details in case you're interested. This does have a 24-month shelf life. And here we have the palette itself. Really pretty. I love how beautifully sleek this packaging is. There are holes on the back so you can poke out the products. And I have seen separately that these pans can be exchanged for her midi palettes. And so if you have any of those, you can pop them in and out. And that way this can be a really nice travel palette. Here is what the palette looks like on the inside. Really pretty. I'm super excited for this. For context, I actually wasn't originally going to pick this up because when I first saw this, the color story seemed a little bit off to me. Like, I guess the pinks just seem like not really in keeping with the rest of the palette. And so I wasn't really sure how I felt about it at first, but after watching some of the initial reviews, it seemed like people were really on board with this formula. And so as a huge Natasha Denona fan, I figured I needed to pick this up. And I'm really excited to also give you guys some comparisons after this. So definitely stay tuned for that portion of the video. But to start things off, let's just do some swatches. So there are 3 bronze and contour shades. These are pretty small pans, and so I'm not sure in practice how well you can actually, just take one of these shades. I think probably you would need to take at least 2 of them at a time. So here are the finger swatches. You can see the lightest one is very light. So let's just put these on the arm. Yeah, the lightest one kind of barely shows up on my skin tone. Can't really see it actually. Let me try to build it up for you guys. I mean, this might still be a decent contour shade. It kind of reminds me of the Charlotte Tilbury Film Star Bronze and Glow, that like really kind of light but cool toned effect, so it can be used as contour. Here's the medium shade, so this definitely shows up nicely. Still a little light on my skin tone, but I think this is kind of the type of depth I typically prefer for a bronzer contour nowadays. And then here's the deeper shade. This one definitely packs more of a punch. So I have seen Glam Girl Chelsea's review of this, and she was able to make this palette work for her. So I think if you have up to a medium tan skin tone, this will work, but any deeper and these probably won't show up. I really do wish she curated 2 of these instead of just 1. For context, previously when she released her Glam Face palettes, there was a light version and a deep version, and the light version is one of my all-time favorite palettes from her, so I really appreciated that for that one she did have those 2 options. I hope if this palette is successful, she'll come out with more versions in the future, because this is definitely, not the most inclusive. Like these eyeshadows, I'm sure will work for everyone, but I don't know, with these face products, it's kind of dicey. So here we have the 2 blushes. Interestingly, they look like they might have different formulas. This one looks very matte. This one has some sheen to it. So this light blush I'm super curious about because I don't really know how well this is going to translate on my skin. Like, can you guys even see it? I'm like, trying to build it up, but I don't really know about this shade. The deeper shade definitely packs a punch though, so my guess is that almost certainly I'm going to be mixing the 2 of them instead of just going in with one or the other, which to be honest kind of defeats the point a bit of having both, but I guess technically you could cocktail your own depth level. The tricky thing will just be making sure your 2 cheeks are even. So now let's get into these eyeshadows. So I am really excited about this because these are a new formula from her, and they're supposed to actually be applied with a finger, which I find really intriguing. I do not like applying eyeshadows with a finger, but I will demo that for you guys, and also a brush. So here is Everyday. I do really like this shade. I anticipate using this one a lot because I feel like this is the perfect sort of neutral, minky shade that could go with a lot of different looks. Then we have Dreamy. This one is definitely the most foiled shade. It's almost like a glitter topper. Interestingly, in person, it actually has a peachy base to it, which I didn't expect. I thought it would just be like white glitter, but hopefully you guys can see it is peachy and then has white glisten in it. Then we have Statement. This one, oh, interesting, is a satin finish. So far all three of these are a different formulation. This one is kind of like a shimmer. This one is a glitter topper. This one is a satin shimmer. And then we have Soft. This one is, I would say, kind of in between these two. It has a little bit more shine than Statement does, but is more subdued than either of these two. And then finally we have Casual. So this one is also more of that satin shimmer. So this one and Statement don't really have much shine to them, though this one has a bit of that gray glisten to it. So I would say if you were doing a more complex eye look, you could start out with either of these and kind of use them like a matte in the crease. Of course, you can also use these all as mattes, but I think these would also work because they don't have that much shine. And then you could put one of these all over the lid and then top it with this shimmery shade. And here's a close-up with the lights lowered. These are really beautiful, so I am super excited to put these on my face. So to start off, because I look like a ghost right now, I'm gonna first go into these Chic products. So I have here my Sonia G Fan M, and I'm gonna try to just use each of these separately so we can sort of see what they look like by themselves. So here's that lightest shade. Not really doing a whole lot for me. Let's put some on the other side as well. It is catching a little bit on my complexion. Okay, I see it a bit more on this side. Do you guys see that? It's just adding a little bit of contour. I mean, I wouldn't be able to use this by itself for sure, but I can just see a tiny bit of definition from that. Let's add some to the forehead area. I do have a pretty light complexion on today. This is my KVD Good Apple foundation, which is one of the lightest in my collection. So the fact that I can still only barely see this means that if you have a light medium complexion like myself, you probably won't want to use this one just by itself. I mean, you know, that's fine. It's kind of hard to use it by itself anyway, but just something to note. Let me also see how this looks on the nose. Maybe this will be good for a subtle nose contour. Okay. Yeah, not a whole lot happening right now in terms of dimension, but that's okay. Let's go into the second shade now. Okay, this one definitely shows up a little bit better. I will say this formula is not working super well with my complexion products today. I don't know if you guys can see, there's a little bit of a patch here. That's interesting. I mean, I'll definitely try this with different base products as well. But yeah, this middle shade I think is pretty good, especially if I were actually going for more of a natural makeup look. I think this is the type of tone that I would be reaching for. This is the sort of bronzer contour shade that is very mistake proof. You can just like sweep it around, build it up, and not have to worry about it. Let me actually put my Fan A through this and use this as my main contour for my nose today. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good shade for nose contour because it's not too deep such that it looks unnatural, but it's also cool enough that it actually does contouring. All right, so now let's dip in a little bit into that deepest shade and see how that looks. Okay, a little bit more. All right, yeah, you can really see that there. Okay, so definitely the deepest shade on my skin tone by itself is a little much. In fact, this side's looking a little muddy. put some on the other side. Maybe I just didn't powder evenly because I feel like this side is looking a lot better than this side. This side's looking super muddy today for some reason. So don't blame this. It might just be whatever I did with my base earlier today. But yeah, this definitely brings depth. So that's good. That means that at least if you have a skin tone like mine, you can definitely, by sort of using different combinations of this, sort of span all of the different seasons. Like the lightest one is so light that even in the dead of winter, I feel like it would be a little light for me. And then the deepest one is deep enough that I think it'll still work for me in the summertime. So I do like that. At least for my skin tone, I feel like this will be able to carry me through all of those different seasons. Now, if you don't have a brush like this, I think it's gonna be quite difficult to actually get each of the shades individually. This brush is actually pretty perfect for this kind of palette. But if, for example, you have a larger brush like this, I think you're gonna mostly get 2 at a time. So now let's go into the blush. I'm gonna use my Cheek Pro from Sonia G, which fortunately fits into this pretty nicely. And just go in with the light shade, which is very light, as you guys can see. Wow. And this is a very powdery matte formula. There's basically no sheen to it. There is some kick up in the pan as I'm doing this. Okay, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this one by itself. I mean, it is good for a natural makeup look. It's not like a hot pink. There is a bit of peachiness to it. But I don't like that it's so matte, it kind of just looks dry on my skin. And also that it doesn't really build up to the level of pigment that I would want. Like I've put on maybe 3 or 4 layers at this point, and it's still not looking that great. All right, let's go into this shade and see how this looks. Okay, that's definitely adding pigment. Whew, okay, yeah. So this one definitely packs more of a punch, especially because this shade itself is kind of in your face. It's red, which I think is interesting. That was the one thing that really stood out to me about this palette when I first saw it and made me a little concerned, because the rest of the palette's so neutral and then the blushes are really pink and red, which I kind of wish she had gone in more with a shade that's similar to her new I Need a Nude blush, like that little compact. That seems like it works really well for an everyday makeup look, whereas this, I mean, it looks fine. I think on camera especially, it's okay, but in person, I am getting slight clown cheek vibes because the red is just a little bit overwhelming. So that is one critique I would have of this, because for me, I see the main use case of this to be for travel. So you could bring this along with you and just not bring anything else. But I don't think, at least for my personal preferences, that this would be like my go-to blush, especially if I wanted a very natural look. This is definitely a blush that I would go for only kind of for very particular occasions and looks, something that's a little bit more glam. Alrighty, so bringing you guys closer, let's get into eyeshadows. So I am gonna do a more comprehensive eyeshadow look, but to start out, I wanted to just swatch them individually on my eyes using my finger, because that's kind of how Natasha Denona has advertised this palette, as just like a bunch of one and dones. Now that's normally not my style, but recently I have been really liking the Lisa Eldridge Liquid Lurix eyeshadows, and so I've come around a bit more to one and done shadows. So we'll see how this goes. But let's start with Everyday. This is the one I do anticipate liking the most just based on how it looks. And that is applying very nicely. My one concern with this is I do wonder if this is going to get hard panned really quickly. I have had this issue in the past with more creamy formulas from Natasha Denona, like in my Yucca palette, which is my current favorite from her. I love the shade Fushi, which is one of her cream to powder mattes, but it got hard pan like after a couple uses, which is really sad because you can't buy individual shadows from her website. But that applied really nicely. As you can see with a finger, it blended in super nicely. I probably would still prefer a brush application on most days because I think I went maybe a little bit far, but this is very pretty. As you can see, it looks very natural on the eyes. There's not that much glimmer to it. Let me actually see if I can add some more glimmer. Yeah, it's pretty subtle. There's just a tiny bit of shine. So this is definitely a good kind of everyday look, especially if you just put a little bit on. This would be a very natural, subtle look. I definitely built it up today just so you guys can really see that color. But yeah, very nice, super, super easy. Now let's go into Dreamy. This one definitely packs way more of a punch. Like, wow, look at that. There is a bit of fallout with this one. I am getting some glitter particles on my face from this, but it is really beautiful in terms of just how wet it looks. Like, wow, super, super pretty. Look at that. So I think this one is really nice, especially if you want something a bit more ethereal. There's obviously not going to be much in terms of base pigment, but you can just see how different these two formulas are. This one gives you much more of a piecey, glistening, shiny effect. This one's just very smooth and kind of just adds a bit of contour to the eye. So at least there's versatility here in terms of the types of looks that you can achieve. Let me actually put some of this shade on top of this one, just so you can see if you wanted to layer, how this would look. If you wanted just a bit more dimension to your look. So yeah, that's really pretty as well. If you want to glam this up, that's an option. And actually, just out of curiosity, before we take this off, let me also take a little bit of Statement and put that in the outer corner of this eye. Still using my finger for everything because that's how this palette should be used apparently. Ooh, that's pretty. All right, yeah, I think this is kind of a little bit more my speed in terms of what I would go for a slightly more glammed up version. So just using these first three shades essentially. So that can give you just a very simple smoky eye, just, you know, using your fingers for application. So that's nice that that's an option. Just while we're here as well, let me take a little bit of Casual on this side as a deepening shade, just to see how that looks. Ooh, wow, Casual is a bit more pigmented, so I would suggest probably going in with a brush if you're gonna use Casual. It's a bit of a misnomer. I don't really know who would use such a smoky shade as their main Casual shade, but pretty. Okay, so yeah, not the best blend, but you can kind of see how you could build up different looks even just like with a finger application. So this just gives a little bit more contour to this side of the face. But so far so good. I really like how easily blendable these are and just how quick and easy they are. Alrighty, so I removed those swatches, so let's keep on chugging along. Let's go into Statement now and see how this looks all over the eyes. This is definitely a lot more pigmented. You get quite a bit of impact right off the bat. It's definitely the kind of shade I would normally want to use a brush for, but it is blending out very easily. If you want a one and done smoky eye, I think this would be great. Again, you can see there's not much shine to this. It's just sort of a satin sheen that you're gonna get, but very pretty. I do like this shade. I do like that so far the tones have been quite neutral, maybe even slightly cool leaning, but I think they do work well for a wide variety of different occasions. For me personally, I don't think I would go into this as a one and done, but I do think I would use this to deepen up the other shades, like I showed you in the previous looks. Now let's go into the soft shade. So this is kind of an anomaly because it's the one more colorful shade that we have. It is a really pretty pink, and I think it really matches well with the blush. It sort of ties everything together. And this one is really, really nice to apply. I like this one. I think this I could see we're actually wearing as a one and done, this one and every day, because they do have a little bit of that shimmery property to them, so that I feel like you get some of that dimensionality even though it's just one shade. And you can just see how well it matches with that blush. This definitely is more of a romantic look though, so if you don't want something that's kind of cutesy, I think this is not the best shade. But if you want something that gives you especially some spring vibes given the season, I think this would be really nice. And let me actually go into a bit of statement on this side just to see how this looks again as a deepening shade. Definitely works well for that. Really pretty. So if you wanted to add some depth, you could go in like that. And then if you wanted to then add a bit of dreamy in the center, just for some light, I think that would be really pretty. There we go. So that's just kind of an amped up version of this look. Definitely makes it something more like what I would typically go for. On the other side, let me actually see if casual can be used to deepen up statement. They're of similar depths, but statement is just a bit cooler toned. So yeah, if you want to add a little bit of mystery to the outside corner, something a bit more gray, even maybe something winged out, then that's one way you could go just to add a bit more interest to this look. So here we have those additional looks done. And for the final swatch, I'm just gonna go into casual by itself and sweep this all over the eye. Ooh, that is a pretty shade. A little bit intimidating worn by itself, but I feel like what's nice about this one in comparison to Statement is that it does have, I think, a little bit more dimension to it. When the light hits it, it has a bit more of a silvery reflect, whereas Statement is just kind of deeper overall. So I think on the one hand that makes Statement particularly good as a deepening shade in other looks, but makes it a little bit less good as a one undone. This one, of course, is a bit harder to blend out than some of the lighter shades, just in that you see the edges more, but that said, I think it's overall doing a really good job. Okay, again, definitely a shade I would apply with a brush normally, since I feel like with a finger, you have just so much less control. And for something like this, you definitely want to be careful about placement. But hopefully this gives you a sense of it. Like where I've blended it out, it almost has a bit more of a brown shade to it, whereas where the light hits it, it has a bit more of that gray reflect. Definitely would be really good for a very sultry look. Let me actually take my reference number 36 and just see if I can nudge some of the edges out just to make it look a little better. Yeah, I think I went a little too far inward with this. But yeah, definitely a very simple one and done shade that can give you a surprising amount of dimension. So now let's get into some of the more complex eye looks. So I think I'm actually going to do two separate looks, one using the bronzers in the crease and the other using the blushes. So sort of a neutral look and then a little bit more of a pinky look. So starting off, I'm going to use my Wayne Goss number 16 in the lightest contour shade. So again, we can sort of test out how this shows up on my skin. As you can see, not much. I mean, yeah, I honestly can't really tell that I'm applying any shadow here. Maybe just a little bit of like grayness is showing up. So now let's move into the second bronzer. This one definitely shows up. This one's actually a very nice transition shade, I would say, for my skin tone. And the shadow is blending out very seamlessly, slash the bronzer. So honestly, if you wanted more of a matte look, this would be really perfect. Just a bit of eye primer plus this. And then I'm going to take the deepest shade and use this in the outer portion. So yeah, not going to give you a ton of depth in terms of an eyeshadow, but Definitely enough depth for the face if you have my skin tone. So there we go. I think that's actually really nice for an everyday basis. This plus one of the shimmers would be really nice. For the lower lash line, I'm going to kind of skip the first one because honestly that one doesn't really show up, and so I'm just going to use that second shade all over the lower lash line and then take some of the deepest bronzer and concentrate it on the outer portion. So there we go. This is kind of the matte look that you can get. Let's on the other side also just go in with this blush. I'm using my Refer number 27 brush. Yeah, this blush is pretty light. Even as a transition shade, I would say it's not giving a ton of impact, but I guess it definitely ties things in with the blush, at least on the cheek if you're going for that more monochromatic everyday look. And then let's go in with the deeper shade. Okay, yeah, this one, since it's a blush, not an eyeshadow, is I think gonna come across more like a transition shade on the lids. It's not gonna give you a lot of depth, but definitely punches things up in terms of having that pinky red effect. Still really pretty, definitely quite romantic. All right, and then on this side, definitely we need to go in with soft. So I'm gonna use a brush for this time. This is my Builder brush from Sonia G. I would say this shade applies more pigmented for sure with a finger as would be expected, but it's still okay with a brush. Yeah, I think finger application will definitely add more of a punch. Here we go. All right, so yeah, this can give you a super monochromatic look. I mean, it honestly doesn't look like I have more than one shade on my lids. It's a pretty look, but very simple at the same time. On the other side, I'm flipping over my brush and going in with Everyday. Let's see how this applies with a brush. And Everyday is maybe just a little bit cooler toned than the bronzers, but is otherwise also quite similar in tone. Interesting. Yeah, I don't like these with a brush application, surprisingly. I feel like it's not really building up quickly enough, and so the finger is definitely the way to go with these eyeshadows. But that said, I am a little concerned. You can see that pattern on Everyday already. That to me is kind of what the beginning of hard pan tends to look like, so I don't know, fingers crossed that that's not what's happening and that's just what it looks like at the moment. But with a brush, these aren't the easiest to pick up. So that is something I would note. I mean, if you want something super natural, I think a brush might work, but I feel like it was just taking me way too much time to try to use my brush to pick them up, and the finger application works a lot better. And then let me also just on the lower lash line on this side, go in with those two blushes, same way I did before. And then to finish these, I will need a brush for this part, which is just kind of going in with the shimmer shade on the lower lash line. Very subtle. Take some of Everyday as well. So here are two very monochromatic looks. Not the most interesting, but if you want to just kind of keep things super simple, you could use these with these two shades and they'll basically give you the same tones, just different finishes on the eyes. Let's try to amp things up a little bit though. So with my Wayne Goss number 19 brush, I'm going to go into Statement and use that on this side to add some dimension to the outer portion of the eyes. Ooh, okay, that's nice. I feel like that is applying pretty well even with a brush, so that's good. Maybe Everyday is just getting hard pan already, which would be very sad, but would be in keeping with what I'm sort of seeing on the pan itself. All right, that is nice. I actually really like how that applied. Super fast, super easily. Ooh. And you see how that just instantly adds a lot more interest to this look. On the other side, I'm going to go in with Casual and use this as the deepening shade. So this one is a little bit lighter to build up. All right, I think that's adding some nice subtle smoke to the look. Alrighty, so here we have those two intermediate looks now. Let me actually turn down the brightness a little bit so hopefully you guys can see those shades more clearly. And now I'm just gonna take some Dreamy and put that on both sides, focusing it on the center of the lid. And this I'm just applying with a finger because I feel like it's going to be a bit messy otherwise. But I really like Dreamy. I think even though this is supposed to be an everyday palette, because so many of the shades kind of just blend in with each other, Dreamy just gives you that extra element of fun, which I think is so important in a palette. Especially if you're traveling and this is like the one palette you're bringing, I think it's nice that you have the option to sort of spice things up with a bit more shimmer. And to finish things off, I'm just going to go in with some of those deepening shades on the lower lash line, just to make sure they match the top. And here we go. So these are the final eyeshadow looks. What do you guys think? And here we have the final look with eyeliner. So here is the pinky side, and here is the more neutral side. I also do want to try this lip liner with you guys though. So even though this Dior Lip Oil, which is what I have on right now, is more what I would typically match with either of these looks, since it's supposed to be, you know, an everyday look, let's take that off and put this on. So here is what the packaging looks like, really nice and red. This is my favorite lip liner formula, so when I was thinking about getting a new red lip liner, I knew I wanted to try this formula. This comes in two shades in terms of the I Need a Rouge line. This one is the cooler, more blue toned red, and she also has a warmer, more orange toned red. So here it is all over the lips. I'm definitely not the most precise person when it comes to lip liner, but this is a really lovely creamy formula. So honestly, you can wear it all over the lips like this on days when your lips are pretty hydrated anyway. What I love about this formula though is it's very, very long lasting and budge proof. It's creamy on application. It doesn't drag at all, but then it's pretty hard to get off. So that's great, at least in my book, for a lip liner. And I think the shade is really nice too. It's a tiny bit cool toned, so it gives you a little bit of that vampiness, but it's definitely a true red at the same time. And for today, I'm gonna top this with red Juniper from Chantecaille. This is in their Year of the Dragon packaging. It doesn't really need it, but I think this just gives it some nice additional hydration. These shades actually are basically the same, which is great. So now that we have the final look, let's get into some quick comparisons and then my final thoughts. So first off, I did want to show you guys a comparison of this with the Glam Face Light palette that's over here. This is one of my favorite Natasha Denona palettes and the one I immediately thought of when this came out. You can see that the new palette is smaller than the Glam Face Light palette, even though it has additional products in it. And here are the palettes side by side. So the Glam Face Light overall is warmer than this new one. This new one has some of those kind of cooler toned shades in it. Also, instead of having a highlighter, the new one has the bronzers, which I personally prefer. And then in this one, it's a cream blush, whereas this one has a powder blush. Again, I think that's an improvement because this one's blush kind of dries out very easily. And as you can see, kind of has a putty texture, which is not my favorite. So I do think she made some improvements between these two palettes, though honestly, I still really love the formulations in this one. I would say in terms of the eyeshadows at least, I probably will still reach for this one more just because it has these two really high shine shimmers, and then these mattes are just perfect for my complexion. And I actually tend to use this highlighter as a more subtle shimmer on the lids. So if I am traveling with this and I want more of an everyday look, I'll use this plus these mattes. And then if I want to glam it up, I'll go into these two very wet, very metallic shimmers. And then I pretty much always skip out on this. For another size comparison, this is the Retro palette next to the perNaturalFacePalette. You can see how much bigger this one is. So of all the recent releases, this one is definitely more compact. Color story wise, here it is next to the Glam palette, which obviously has a lot more shades, but also is kind of a different color story in general. This one's pink is much more pronounced, and that really cool toned casual shade makes it a little bit distinct from the Glam palette, which I would say is overall just more neutral and brown leaning. In terms of comparison swatches, I did want to do one quick comparison with Lunar Nude from Pat McGrath, because this is one of my current favorite bronzers and one that also has that sort of bronzer effect on my skin. So I'm going to just put that over here so we can see how it looks. Let me actually build that up a little bit. So I feel like that shade kind of looks fairly similar actually to this shade, maybe mixed a bit with this one over here. So yeah, I feel like if you like Lunar Nude from Pat McGrath, you'll probably like the tones of the bronzers in this palette. So for me, that's good news because I do really love this. I would say formulation-wise, I think this one's a little easier to use for me. I find that I never have issues with blendability with this, whereas the ones today just weren't quite as blendable. I also just wanted to do a quick comparison with this Electric Bloom shade from Pat McGrath. Let's just put that over here. That's kind of what I thought of with this blush. And I guess Electric Bloom is a little bit more vibrant, but it's honestly quite similar to this one. So if you have Electric Bloom in your collection, you can try that on and that should give you a very similar effect to this. The Pat McGrath blush though is definitely more pigmented, so that's one thing to keep in mind. In terms of the lighter shade, I'm actually going to swatch Divine Rose from Pat McGrath as well and just put that over here. So, okay, Divine Rose is way more pigmented and cool toned in comparison to the lighter one. So that's not a great dupe, but I think Electric Bloom is a decent dupe for the darker one. It's just more coral, I would say, than this one. So now for my overall initial impressions about this palette. So I do really love how compact this palette is. I think in general, this is an excellent palette for someone who either travels a lot or otherwise just really likes to have all their products in one place. So if you're someone who just wants to bring like 4 or 5 products with you traveling, like complexion, brows, lips, and then this guy, then it's really nice in that this will have you covered. You can do a look like any of the ones I did today and have quite a bit of versatility just with this one palette. That said, none of the formulas in this palette I would say are my favorites from Natasha Denona. The bronze and contour was okay, but it did look a little patchy on this side of my face. Like I said, it might just have to do with my complexion combo today, so I will have to try this with other complexion products, but it wasn't, a seamless start to say the least. This lighter bronze shade especially just doesn't really provide much impact, whereas the deepest bronze shade is a little bit heavy on me, so I do think that I'll need to approach this with a smaller brush to ensure that I'm mainly getting the middle one. So that is a little finicky in comparison to, for example, just having a single blush that is the perfect shade. Of course, on the plus side, like I said, this palette can take you from winter to summer if you have a complexion similar to mine, and you can just sort of cocktail your own custom version. For the blush, I really, really wish she had put a different blush for the lighter one, because at least for me, it just really doesn't show up at all, and I feel like I have to blend it a lot to see anything, and the more I blend it, the more dry my cheeks look. The deeper shade I think is quite nice and provides a good level of pigmentation with control as well. Even though it's quite pigmented, I didn't feel like I had to be worried about having too much of the product on my face. I think in practice though, I'm just going to swirl these two together most times when I use this blush. I do really wish though the color of this blush was just a bit different, because I feel like it doesn't really go with the rest of the palette if what your goal is just super simple, minimalist, everyday makeup, which is in theory what this palette is advertised for. At least for me, these are just not the tones I would go for that kind of day. And so if I were taking this on a trip with me, I would have to bring a separate blush that is more of a neutral tone. In terms of the eyeshadows, I would say that I'm kind of on the fence. On the one hand, I think if you are someone who loves using just fingers for application, this was super easy to use fingers for. For me personally though, I do prefer a brush application, and I felt like these were quite difficult to apply all over the lid with a brush. Applied to specific smaller sections of my eyes, like the outer corner or lower lash line, they were fine. But to really kind of get that opacity throughout my entire lids was difficult with these. I ended up having to use a finger. And so that's not my favorite, because with my other Natasha Denona shadows, I feel like I can use them with fingers or with brushes and not have an issue. In addition, as I mentioned, I am just very concerned that every day kind of looks already like it's starting to hard pan. Like if you guys can see that pattern over here, that is usually for me what it looks like when things are hard panning. You don't see that in any of these other shades. So I mean, actually you see a little bit of that here, but you don't see it here. So yeah, that's not a great sign. I'll have to keep you guys updated about that. And I'm also curious about your guys' experiences. But I mean, you saw how I used it today. I only used it a few times, and so it's very concerning that it already might be hard panning. Like I said, I have had that issue though in the past with Natasha Denona shadows, so that's something I am worried about with this guy. On the whole though, I do think the looks were quite beautiful, and I do enjoy this packaging. I think it's very gorgeous, very sleek. I think this is a very cool idea, and I hope that she comes out with more shades that we can switch out, or just more versions of this palette. I do like that this is an interchangeable palette, and so if you just want to buy this and you have other Natasha Denona shades that you want to swap in and out, I think that's really great. Hopefully she provides some options for these guys as well to be swapped out. But let me know in the comment section what you guys think about this palette. Have you picked it up? If so, what your thoughts have been. This is one of the first new releases of the year that kind of caught my eye. And so from that standpoint, I am excited to continue playing around with it and give you guys updated impressions. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.